Welcome to History Teller YT. Tonight, we'll take you deep into the grim reality of medieval prisons, places where survival wasn't promised and pain was always present. Let's begin your journey and discover why you wouldn't last even a day. In the dark corners of history, long before modern justice or basic human rights, there existed a place feared by kings and commoners alike. A world where silence echoed louder than screams. A place so grim, so torturous, that even one night inside could break the strongest of souls. This was the medieval prison. Imagine a moment. You've been accused, maybe falsely, of stealing bread or speaking against a noble. There's no trial, no lawyer, no defense. Instead, you're grabbed by armed guards and dragged across the muddy roads of a medieval town. You're not taken to a cell with iron bars and a bed. You're taken to the dungeon. A narrow stone staircase leads downward, far beneath the castle or the city keep. The air turns colder. Moisture clings to your skin. The smell? It's a mix of rot, old blood, sweat, and filth, a stench that never leaves. As the heavy door creaks open, you step inside. Darkness swallows you whole. This is not a prison like in modern movies. There are no beds, no bathrooms, no windows, just stone walls, rusted chains, and straw. Maybe if you're lucky, rats scurry around, gnawing at anything that moves. The floor is damp with urine and mold. Your only source of light is a single flickering torch far down the hallway. You share this space with others, maybe 5, maybe 20. Some are shackled to the wall. Others lie in corners, too weak to move. One is moaning softly, another hasn't moved in days. And you, the newest prisoner, must find a place to sit, on the floor, next to the bones of someone who didn't make it. Now, let's talk about the guards. They're not trained professionals. They're brutes, paid in coin, ale, and sometimes pleasure. Their job? Keep you in line, feed you rarely, and punish you when they feel like it. If you beg, they laugh. If you resist, they beat you. If you cry, they enjoy it. They hold all the power, and they know it. Some guards run black markets, smuggling in scraps of food for money or offering small comforts in exchange for favors. Others just enjoy hurting people, especially the weak ones. The real punishment of medieval prisons wasn't always torture. It was survival. There's no sewage system. Buckets overflow. Infections spread. Lice and fleas cover your skin within hours. The stench of gangrene and open wounds lingers constantly. People died not from execution, but from disease, starvation, and despair. There were no doctors, no medicine, no mercy. Your daily meal, if it comes at all, is likely a chunk of moldy bread soaked in dirty water or thin ale. No plats, just tossed onto the ground where rats race you to it. Water comes from a bucket that hasn't been cleaned in weeks. You drink it or you die of thirst. Simple choice. There are no clocks in prison. No idea of night or day. Time blurs. Some prisoners scream endlessly. Others talk to themselves in the dark. Some pray. Others just rock back and forth, slowly losing touch with reality. You don't sleep. Not really. You just fade in and out, hoping the next time you wake up, it's over. But it never is. Welcome to part 2 of your journey inside the prison walls. Let's explore how pain was used as a tool of truth and why silence often cost people their sanity or their lives. In most medieval prisons, you weren't there to serve a sentence. You were there to confess. The system didn't care if you were guilty, only that you said you were. Confession, that was the goal. Truth didn't matter. Evidence didn't matter. And if words didn't come freely, they had ways to help you speak. Deep beneath the dungeon, A separate room waited, cold, silent, and lit by torchlight. The walls were stained with old blood. Chains dangled from hooks. The floor, stone and soaked. And in the center of the room stood the devices. The rack, the thumbscrew, the iron chair, the breaking wheel, the pair of anguish, the scavenger's daughter. Each tool had one purpose: pain. Controlled, prolonged, psychological. The rack was simple in design and brutal in effect. You'd be tied by your wrists and ankles on a wooden frame. Then slowly, ever so slowly, the guard would turn the wheel. With each rotation, your body stretched. Musculus tora, joints dislocated, ligaments snapped. Some prisoners confessed before it began. Others passed out from the agony. And a few were never the same again. Cold iron spikes covered the entire surface of a chair. Back, seat, arms, legs, all sharpened. The prisoner was strapped into it, slowly. Carefully. If you moved, the spikes dug in deeper. They didn't kill you. Not right away. The real torment was mental. You sat still, in fear, knowing that even a twitch could shred your flesh. Sometimes, coals were placed underneath to heat the metal, turning the pain into burning agony. Not all torture left scars. Some torturers whispered false confessions into your ears for days. Others forced prisoners to witness executions repeatedly. Sleep deprivation, food manipulation, isolation. These were medieval mind games. They'd lie, they'd bribe, they'd terrify you with the screams of others. And slowly, they'd break you. Another popular method? Simple and deadly. They'd tie you down and pour water drop by drop on your forehead. At first, it tickled. Then it irritated. Eventually, it drove men insane. Or they would submerge you in cold water until your heart nearly stopped. Then revive you. Then repeat. It wasn't about information. It was about domination. The breaking wheel was a public spectacle. Bones shattered. Limbs twisted. Life drained slowly. The pair of anguish? Inserted into the mouth, or worse. Then cranked open. Internal damage. Unseen agony. All for the sake of a confession. Eventually, every prisoner said it. I did it, even if they didn't. Why? Because the pain became unbearable. Because survival wasn't the goal. Because they'd say anything just to make it stop. But here's the catch. Even after confession, many were still executed or left to rot in the cells. Ironically, the church played a major role in prison torture. During the Inquisition, heretics were tortured in God's name. Monks documented procedures. Confessors prayed before the pain began. In their eyes, they weren't hurting you. They were saving your soul. And that may be the most terrifying part of all. In this part, we'll go beyond the chains and blood into the day-to-day of life inside a medieval prison. Who ruled the cell? Who starved? Who was protected and who was prey? Let's take a closer look at the cruel society within the stone walls. You enter the cell, and everything changes. You're not free, but you're also not alone. Within this rotten, dark world, there's a system. One not created by kings or guards, but by the prisoners themselves. And you're at the very bottom. Medieval prisons had no assigned beds. Guards didn't care where you sat, and food was barely given. So prisoners formed their own structure, a brutal primal hierarchy. At the top, noble prisoners, wealthy or politically important. Next, long-term survivors, hardened, respected inmates. Below them, useful newcomers, those who brought skills, money, or strength. At the bottom, the weak, sick, poor, children, or the insane. Power meant survival. Weakness meant suffering. Nobles weren't treated like commoners. They often got private rooms, sometimes even with servants. They had access to better food, could send letters, bribe guards, or buy protection. Some even had furniture brought in. They wore better clothes. Sometimes they were allowed visitors. To the rest of the prisoners, they were untouchable. But make no mistake, even noble blood didn't stop the loneliness. And betrayal was always a bribe away. Often, it wasn't the nobles, but long-term prisoners who ruled the cells. These were men who had survived for years inside. They knew the guards, controlled the food, led gangs inside the dungeon. They enforced rules, punished violators, offered protection for a price. Disobey them, and you'd suffer worse than any guard could deliver. Even in filth, an economy thrived. A clean rag? Worth a meal. A knife? Power. Clean water? A luxury. A piece of bread could get you a night of safety. Prisoners traded, bartered, and bribed. Some became informants. Others became smugglers. Everything had a price, even your dignity. Many prisoners turned to faith to survive. Some carved crosses into the wall. Others whispered prayers at night. A few sang hymns, soft and slow. But even belief had rules. Blasphemers were beaten. Witches were blamed for sickness. And some began to believe their suffering was divine punishment. Hope was thin, but was all they had. When someone died in the cell, it wasn't always noticed. Sometimes the body sat for hours, sometimes days. The smell would warn the guards, if they bothered to come. Often the corpse was looted, clothing, food scraps, even teeth, and then dragged out like garbage. Not all prisoners were adults. Children, orphans, thieves, or even wrongly accused were thrown into cells too. They rarely survived long. As for the mentally ill, they weren't treated. They were mocked, feared, beaten. Some muttered to themselves. Others screamed at walls. A few simply curled up and stopped moving. Despite the horror, humanity flickered. Two strangers shared a crust of bread. A dying man was given water. A woman sang softly to a child. But betrayal was always near. A friend today could sell you out tomorrow. Kindness was rare, precious, short-lived, but it reminded the broken. They were still human. What happens when your time in the dungeon ends? In the medieval world, it often ended at the blade of justice. But death wasn't just a punishment. It was a message, a ritual, a public show. In this chapter, we'll walk with the condemned from their final breath in prison to their last step on the scaffold. And along the way, you'll see how death became theater. It begins with the sentence. Some heard it from a judge, others from a whisper in the dark. There was no appeal, no second chance, only a date and a method. For many, the waiting was worse than the death. The final night was often quiet. A priest might visit, offering confession, last prayers, or simply presence. Sometimes the prisoner was given a final meal, bread, ale, meat if they were lucky. Others were beaten into silence or dragged from their cells, bleeding and broken. Some spent their last night sobbing. Others stared blankly into the dark. And some tried to escape. Few ever succeeded. The next morning, the doors opened. Chains clinked. Guards marched. The streets filled. Crowds gathered. Children climbed rooftops. Vendors sold food near the gallows. It was a festival of death. The prisoner walked, barefoot, bound, usually in rags. People spit. Some prayed. Others cheered. Every step was a countdown, every breath possibly the last. Medieval societies turned execution into brutal lessons. Let's look at some of the most infamous. Dagger beheading, reserved for nobles or clean deaths. A sharp blade, one swing if you were lucky, but many were not. Dull axes, trembling hands, multiple strikes. The crowd gasped or laughed. Fire burning at the stake. Used for heretics, witches, and rebels. Would pile high. Fire set beneath the feet. Death came slow by smoke, flame, and fear. Families were forced to watch. Hanging, the most common method. Rope tightened around the neck. Sometimes the drop snapped the neck. Often it didn't. The condemned kicked, twitched, and finally stilled. Axe breaking on the wheel. The body was tied across a... Why did people watch? Because it was normal. In a world without TV, the execution was drama. It was fear. It was morality. Parents brought children. Priests gave sermons during the burning. Songs were written about the brave or the foolish. Sometimes the crowd turned angry, storming the gallows. Other times they begged for mercy, but the executioner rarely listened. Who did the killing? The executioner, masked, feared, and paid. They weren't always cruel. Some were precise. Others drank heavily. Some cried after a bad job. Most were hated by society. They lived alone, isolated, haunted, but they had power, and in a way, they too were prisoners. Sometimes mercy came, a clean death, a hidden execution, a secret burial, but these were rare. Most died screaming, alone, watched by hundreds, and when it was over, the crowd moved on. Back to bread, back to gossip, back to life. And then in medieval Europe, a woman could be imprisoned for witchcraft, adultery, gossip, pregnancy outside marriage, theft, heresy, or simply being accused. Truth rarely mattered. One rumor, one jealous neighbor, one powerful man, that's all it took. And so they were dragged away, screaming, pregnant, or holding infants. Women weren't given separate cells in most prisons. They were thrown in with men or locked inside dungeons. These spaces were smaller, darker, more isolated. Guards rarely protected them. In fact, they were often the biggest threat. Sex asterisk UAL abuse in prisons was not only common, it was expected. Guards used food, warmth, and safety as weapons. Submit or starve. Obey or be punished. Cry, and no one will hear. Some women were assaulted nightly. Some became pregnant in chains. Others miscarried in filth. There were no laws to protect them. No trials for their violators. Just silence and shame. Pregnant women were not spared. They gave birth on stone floors. Used straw and rags to catch blood. Their babies often died within days. No medicine, no midwife, no comfort. And if the child survived, it became a prisoner too. Women who spoke out, read books, used herbs, or simply defied their husbands were branded witches. They were stripped, shaved, tortured, drowned to test purity, burned at the stake. Tens of thousands died this way. Their only crime? Being different. Noble women were treated slightly better. They might get house arrest or private rooms. Some even lived in castles as honored prisoners. But peasant women? They had nothing. Their bodies were currency. Their voices useless. Their suffering invisible. Even in horror, women supported one another, sharing food scraps, hiding each other during beatings. singing to babies, whispering prayers. They formed quiet alliances, looked out for each other, even died for one another. A soft touch, a shared tear, a stolen moment of dignity. When female prisoners died, no one cared. No marquer, no name, no record. Their bodies were thrown into mass pits, their babies buried with them. But their stories, though erased, still haunt stone walls. If you listen close enough, you might still hear their whispers. And for children, the broken, the forgotten, there was no escape. Let's enter the darkest corners of the dungeon and face the story's history tries to forget. Scene 1. The child prisoners. Yes, children were imprisoned, as young as 7 or even younger. Their crimes? Stealing bread, playing where they shouldn't, being born to prisoners, or having no one to protect them. And once inside, they weren't treated differently. No mercy, no separation, just fear. Many children were born in prison. Their mothers, accused thieves, fallen women, or political pawns. Once the mother died, which happened often, the child was left behind, an orphan in chains. Some were raised by other prisoners. Others simply vanished. No record, no video, no name, just gone. Imagine growing up, in darkness, with screams as lullabies, rats as companions, hunger as a daily test. There were no toys, no books, no learning, only survival. Some children never spoke again. Others became criminals themselves, trained in the art of pain and betrayal before their 10th birthday. In medieval Europe, mental illness wasn't understood. It was feared, blamed, beaten, people with schizophrenia, epilepsy, trauma, depression, autism were branded as possessed or cursed. They were locked in cells, sometimes chained to walls for years. Others were left naked, exposed to cold, mocked, and spit on. Some prisons became dumping grounds for the insane. Families would pay guards to get rid of their difficult children or relatives. They were left there forgotten. No care, no treatment, just endless nights in screaming silence. And in time, the line between prisoner and madness blurred. Some mentally ill prisoners were tested. Cold water submersion, burning with irons, bloodletting, religious exorcisms, public humiliation. None of it helped. Most didn't survive. Those who did wished they hadn't. Not everyone was cruel. Some older prisoners protected the children, fed them scraps, told stories, kept them warm on cold nights. Others shielded the mad, calmed their screams, cleaned their mess, treated them like people. These tiny acts of kindness were all the hope some ever had. Children died every week. The mad were found hanging, cold bodies removed quietly. There were no prayers, no gravestones. No one remembered. History erased them, but the walls remembered their voices. In this part, we'll walk alongside the bold, the clever, and the desperate. Those who dug tunnels, started riots, and risked everything for one last breath of freedom. This is the story of escape. Most prisoners didn't even try. Why? Thick stone walls, armed guards, torture as punishment, no mops, no alais, and no second chance if caught. But for some, the choice was simple: escape or die trying. There were no hacksaws or laser cutters, only rusty nails, bone fragments, fire-hardened spoons, bits of chain, sharp rocks, smuggled daggers. Each tool was hidden, inside straw beds, under floor stones, or in body cavities. Creativity meant survival. Let's look at some real documented escapes. Hammer and wrench the Tower of London, 1101. Ranulph Flambard, a bishop accused of corruption, smuggled in a rope inside a wine barrel. After getting guards drunk, he slipped out of a window and climbed down into the Thames. He fled to Normandy and lived free. Brick Chateau d'If, 16th century. This prison inspired the Count of Monte Cristo. Though fiction, it was based on tales of prisoners digging out with spoons and bone tools. Fire Paris Bastille Riot, 1789. The people didn't escape. They stormed in. 7 prisoners freed. Hundreds of guards overwhelmed. The prison destroyed forever. Some dug for months. With spoons, nails, bones. Hiding the dirt in their beds. Timing the work with storms or noise. Working by touch in darkness. And when the hole was ready, they crawled through mud, sewage, stone, toward freedom. Some made it. Most didn't. Not all escapes needed digging. Some prisoners, bribed guards, seduced jailers, faked illness, switched clothes with visitors, played dead. One man even used a decoy made of bread dough to fool a head count. When escape wasn't an option, rebellion was. Fires set with straw and piss. Guards overpowered during food drops. Loud chants turning to chaos. Chains used as whips. Doors smashed with bodies. Some riots lasted hours. Others minutes. But they were always bloody. And the aftermath? Executions. Torture. Starvation. Yet prisoners kept rising. For every successful escape, there were 100 failures. Caught mid-climb, tunnels collapsing, betrayed by fellow inmates, starved in the sewers, shot during the run. Those who failed weren't killed immediately. They were made an example. Limbs broken, hung in chains, faces branded, tongues cut, and displayed like trophies. A few were never found. No record, no trail, no body. Did they die in the woods? Or build a new life far away? We'll never know, but their names are whispered like legends. But did they ever truly vanish? In this final part, we'll explore how the era of chains ended, and why its echoes still haunt us today. By the late 1600s, winds of change swept across Europe. Enlightenment thinkers began questioning torture. Philosophers argued for rights, fairness, mercy. Writers exposed prison conditions to the public. And slowly, leaders listened. Some countries began passing laws. Torture was banned in parts of France, Italy, and England. Trial by ordeal ended. Public executions became rarer. New prison models were built. More light, individual cells, structured schedules. It was the beginning of prison reform. But progress was slow, very slow. In the 18th and 19th centuries, new ideas took root. Rehabilitation over punishment. Work programs instead of rot. Education for inmates. Medical care and mental health wards. Prisons became institutions of discipline, not just despair. The goal? To correct, not crush. Dungeons were closed, collapsed, buried, turned into museums. But not everything was erased. Solitary confinement replaced darkness. Psychological control replaced torture. Surveillance replaced chains. The tools changed, but the intent sometimes stayed the same. Even today, children are imprisoned. Innocents are punished. Prison abuse continues. Corruption thrives behind bars. We've moved on from the rack and the whip, but fear, pain, and silence still exist. just behind different doors. Many ancient prisons remain. The Tower of London, Chateau d'If, the Bastille ruins, Eastern State Penitentiary in the U.S. Some say they're haunted. By ghosts, yes, but more deeply by memory of the thousands who cried, bled, and died there. Why do we tell these stories? Because forgetting them risks repeating them. Because behind every cell door was a child, a mother, a wrongly accused man, a soul trying to survive. Their voices were taken. We must give them back. And so, the dungeons fell silent. The chains rusted. The blood dried. But if you listen carefully, their stories still echo through stone. And maybe through us.